Hello, gorgeous. How are you? I'm going to talk about expectations today in this short video, just a 15-minute thing, maybe less. Just want to talk about internal and external expectations and how much pressure we can be put under by others and ourselves. Sometimes things can feel a bit heavy, can't they? Sometimes we can feel overloaded by what we're having to deal with, and all we really want to do is sit down and shed the load we're carrying. But usually it's a lot harder to do than we'd like it to be. Sometimes we have to find a way to keep going, to dig deep, as the saying goes. Some of us perform better under pressure. In fact, a certain amount of stress is important because it pushes us to achieve, especially when we have to. And there are times in life when we do have to. But sometimes the expectations we have to meet out there in the world feel like too much to carry. And if it feels like they are, it's time to do something about that. In terms of expectations, I'm not just talking about the ones that come from other people. Partners, kids, colleagues, bosses, customers, family. Demands come from everywhere, and that can be a lot just in itself. But have you considered that sometimes the pressure is compounded because you expect a lot of yourself too? That sometimes the pressure you're under is the result of your own demands. You don't want to let someone down, do you? And I get that. You want to meet the expectations of others because that enables you to feel a sense of achievement and value. And those things are really important. But there's a fine line between a sense of competence to make those achievements and a sense of overwhelm because it's harder than you think. And then you might start to stumble a little, and then you end up feeling guilty for not managing things better, or feeling vaguely or even actively ashamed of looking incompetent, even if it's only you that sees you that way. And that happens far too often. Most people are their own worst critics, but women tend to be better at beating themselves up than men are about what they feel they've failed to do. I totally get it because I'm in this boat with you a lot of the time. As an overachiever, I've always put myself under huge pressure to do more and do better. And I beat myself to an absolute pulp when I see myself as having failed. I'm a lot better than I used to be at identifying where the pressure's coming from and working to reduce it when it comes in from external sources, and more importantly, taking it off myself. I do have to regularly check myself and take a step back in whatever way I can when the pressure feels like it's getting too heavy to bear, because that still does happen to me sometimes. It's unavoidable sometimes. But we all wear a lot of hats, don't we? And we all want to wear them well. So we regularly put ourselves under ridiculous pressure to make sure the hat we're wearing at any given time doesn't fall off. Self-sourced pressure might be a habit you've cultivated over a long period of time, and if that's the case, it's probably something you're used to. But that's pretty scary when you think about it. Being used to high amounts of stress, regarding that as normal for yourself, well, that could lead you into all kinds of dangerous territory, and I'm talking about physical and mental health. Stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline, and consistently high amounts, are well documented as high risks to health, to the development of neurodegenerative diseases, and to life expectancy. You can literally shorten your life by trying to keep operating under too much stress. Is that a gamble that you really want to take? So you have to take the pressure off. If you feel like you're constantly operating in panic mode or overload, you have to take the pressure off somehow. And the sad fact is that some of the expectations you have to deal with in life can't be shirked. You have responsibilities you can't abdicate from, and that's a cold, hard fact. It's logical, therefore, as well as sensible, that you look internally first. So what messages are you giving yourself? Are you telling yourself that something has to be done within a certain time frame? Are you telling yourself that you have a lot to lose by not meeting a certain person's demands? Are you telling yourself that you'll be letting someone down by not being or giving them what they need? Are you putting yourself under too much pressure? Self-talk is such a powerful thing. It's why so many health gurus advocate self-affirmations. Standing in front of a mirror and telling yourself you can do something, that you've got this, that you can manage, that you can cope with whatever life throws at you. They're positive affirmations, yes, but how realistic are they? There's a very fine line between reassuring yourself about something you need to do and actually overloading yourself. You can stand in front of a mirror and talk to yourself all you want in that kind of positive way, but you need to be aware that you might just be overloading yourself with too much pressure, and to then go off and do what's expected of you to the standard you think is expected. And that's another thing. What's a good enough standard? As the overachiever I used to be, I was once pulled up very short by a boss I had at the time who asked me to go and clean an apartment that we were about to rent to new tenants. The cleaner was off sick, it needed to be done, so she asked me to go and do it. As I was leaving the office, she said to me, "It just has to be clean, dear, not hotel clean." And I still remember that as being significant and reminding me that the pressure I was about to put myself under really wasn't necessary. She knew me better than I knew myself, I think, certainly about my perception of what needed to be done. So what you have to know, and learn if you don't already know, is that what's good enough for someone else can be good enough for you too. If someone doesn't expect you to be a perfectionist about something, it's okay to take the pressure off to produce perfection off yourself. Get rid of that demon right now. In terms of affirmations, yes, they are important, but as I've already tried to explain, it's not as simple as telling yourself how fantastic you are, because you are actually, and don't you forget it. But it's probably of far greater value to you to tell yourself that you're going to do your best today, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You can tell yourself that certain things can take longer if that's the way it has to be for you to do them well. You can tell yourself that if you don't get something finished, nobody will die. And if that's not a massive positive, I don't know what is. But the point of it is that putting yourself under a huge amount of pressure to keep that hat in place is not necessarily going to help you to do things better or faster or more effectively. It might actually have the opposite effect. You might end up making a mess of it because you're exhausted, panicked, afraid of the consequences of stuffing up, and Lord knows what else you're telling yourself. Whatever you say to yourself matters. So take a beat or two to sit quietly and ask yourself what messages you're giving yourself and whether or not they are in fact helping or getting in the way. If you're honest with yourself, and you really do need to be, you might be surprised to discover that a lot of the overwhelm you're feeling is coming from within yourself. Once you know, you can think about ways to tell yourself something different, something positive in a more constructive way that will help you take some of the load off. Believe me, I know how tough an exercise that is because I've done it myself. A few years ago, I was running a cleaning business. I had a lot of external factors and influences that I couldn't control that were seriously affecting my ability to run that business, but I wasn't wise enough to recognize that, and my health hit the deck. My blood pressure went through the roof, my weight ballooned, which put me at serious risk of type 2 diabetes, my sleep went haywire, and all kinds of other things were happening that had me on a fast track to a heart attack or a stroke. I didn't listen to the different ways in which my body and brain were howling at me. I just kept telling myself that failure wasn't an option. I went through a peculiar kind of hell with myself, and it wasn't until my doctor got heavy with me and told me that things had to change, and a friend's husband died from a heart attack at roughly the same time, that I took that step back and did the spade work of self-analysis. And that was tough, believe me, that wasn't easy at all. But I realized that I was my own worst enemy. So I put that business into dormancy and worked on rebuilding my health. I've now stopped being an overachiever. I now know where my limits are, and I understand how to keep a lot of the unnecessary pressure off myself. This is something we all need to know how to do as busy women in the world. What we tell ourselves is the most critical part of that. Expectations from outside sources are a different thing altogether. Sometimes you do have to comply with or perform to the expectations of other people. With all of the hats you wear come certain responsibilities and obligations. There's no avoiding that. But it's okay to get some help with those if it takes a little pressure off. If you're stretched thin, you can look at ways to alleviate some of what you feel so burdened by. I always tell women who work full time to get themselves a cleaner. Some of them come up with ridiculous excuses for not getting a cleaner. They say they can't afford it, or they'd have to tidy up before the cleaner came, which would defeat the purpose. And the worst excuse of all is the one where they say their husbands wouldn't let them do it. That's crazy. Those women need to stop hiding behind their husbands and stop letting them dictate how much pressure they have to stay under. That's just one example. One of my friend's daughters is a busy career woman, and she's just managed to get a few other mums to do the school run on a rota. So she now only has to pick kids up 2 days a week instead of 5. It's a small thing for all of those mums, but the difference it's made is huge. It's also okay to tell someone that their demands or expectations are unreasonable. We're not very good at that either, are we? Standing our ground when others require us to be or do something that isn't realistic on some level, whether it's the time involved in it, the deadline around it, or whatever else it is that makes it unreasonable. All too often, you'll just try to figure out how to meet that demand, won't you? And you'll put yourself under ridiculous pressure in the process. That's not fair, and you need to realize that, and you have to get better about saying it. If you're consistently having to let someone down on projects or tasks, that's usually a pretty good indicator that something else in your life has to change, and you'll need to get onto that. But learning how to manage other people's expectations also has the great effect of feeling less pressured internally too. Boundaries are important, and here's the thing. People won't respect your boundaries if they don't know where they are, and they can't, can they? They'll never know where they are if you don't tell them. So tell them. Put the big girl pants on and tell people what is and isn't acceptable as far as their expectations go. That might be a scary prospect, but you can do it. You're doing everything else. Do that too. Tell people what's okay and what's not. Nobody's going to hang you for saying it. And if they get a bit bent out of shape, well, that's for them to overcome, not you. Taking charge of how much pressure you allow yourself to bear puts you in direct control of it. And where expectations can't be avoided, if it's a case of figuring out how you can take the pressure off in other areas of your life that can take it, figure out how to do that too. Because you can do it. I mean, you're brilliant at everything. You can be brilliant at that as well. It might also be, though, that because you're exhausted, things feel more intense than they otherwise might. So you do need to decide as honestly as you can whether what someone else expects of you is in fact unreasonable, or whether you just see it that way because you're overburdened. Either way, you need to make some changes. And because you are so extraordinary and you wear your hats so well, just know this, you'll be able to wear them even better if you can recognize where your stress is coming from and what you can do to reduce it. That way, the hats all stand a better chance of staying on. And you do look rather beautiful in all of them, if you'll permit me to say so.